Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Rex Hoggard. Rex is a senior writer at Golf Channel. In this episode, I chat with Rex about his journey into sports media, how serving on the United States Marine Corps prepared him to be a journalist, his approach covering golf's biggest tournaments, his transition to not only being a writer, but on-air talent, and his advice for young journalists wanting to cover golf. The Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to episode 44 with Rex Hoggard of Golf Channel on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I am joined by Rex Hoggard. He is a senior writer at Golf Channel. Rex, thanks so much for joining me today on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Of course, thanks for having me on.
And Rex, we'll get into your career, but I just wanted to get, your thoughts. Obviously, with this episode being recorded, it's the Travelers Championship this week, the third PGA Tour event since the hiatus. But the commissioner of the PGA Tour, Jay Monahan, yesterday with a press conference talked about adjustments to the health guidelines given the 3 positive COVID-19 cases that occurred on site. So just your thoughts on what this resumption has been like for the PGA Tour.
Well, I mean, they made it a week and a half with no positive tests, so I think that was a victory of sorts. Now, where do we go from there? Only time's going to tell. I will say that after the first positive test, I was in Hilton Head when Nick Watney tested positive. There was a level of concern that wasn't there before. I think as athletes, and you could probably say this in any sport, as athletes tend to believe they're bulletproof and that this thing won't impact them. It was a wake-up call, and I think I started taking it a little bit more seriously. Certainly, there were more positive tests this week, and that's concerning. That being said, and I said this last night on Golf Central with Gary Williams, having spoken to players after Nick Watney's positive test and hearing it from Jordan Spieth and Rory McIlroy, and these are players who are part of the decision-making process. They're on the pack, they're on the policy board. There was a resolve in their voices, and it was a matter of this wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when, and they were fully prepared for this. And I think they're fully prepared for this to continue to happen. And I don't think this isn't said, I'm not trying to be cavalier about it. And they're certainly not trying to be unsafe, but this was part of the process of coming back. There were going to be positive tests, and the tour simply had to close the bubble a little bit more. However, that being said, this is never, and I'm as guilty as the next journalist of calling it a bubble, and it really is not. And I'll give you examples of why it's not, but this isn't going to be like the NBA, where they can have those players safely tucked away in a very nice hotel at Walt Disney World Resort and the rest of the world can't get access to them. That's not the case at all. This is a traveling circus. You're staying in hotels that there are people there who are outside the bubble. You're interacting with people who haven't been tested. So it's always going to be an issue of, okay, how many positive tests is acceptable? Because they're going to happen.
Yeah, and of course, the commissioner yesterday made it pretty, clear that, when you go to a new, state or event, you're sort of an invited guest, if you will. That's what he said, and just how you're going into a new market. So, like you said, it's not like the NBA that's a whole bubble. You're going to different events. But someone asked yesterday during the press conference about, the players and the caddies, just in terms of their following of, the social distancing guidelines. And for me watching on TV, you can see guys, maybe were high-fiving their caddies and there may not have been as strict to the social distancing as, as the guidelines would have suggested. So I'm just curious, just your thoughts on, the need for maybe perhaps, enforceability. I know that the commissioner said yesterday enhanced, repercussions if people don't follow those guidelines.
Well, and I think the tour has done a great job. So this isn't meant as a criticism at all. However, there was a picture that was posted right before that press conference of Commissioner Jay Monahan bumping knuckles with Rory McIlroy last week in Hilton Head. So he is as guilty as the next person, and I'm sure if he was sitting here, he would tell us the same thing. And the repercussions are going to be serious. what you end up with is Nick Watney last week had to quarantine for 10 days. And so there is a stipend that the tour pays him, significant amount of money. It's $100,000. And if you're found not to be following the protocols and you test positive, you're not going to get that stipend. So there's financial motivation there for the players. And I'm sure there'll be other motivations there as well. That being said, these are all learned behaviors. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of criticism that first week in Fort Worth about, well, the caddies they're handling the golf clubs and they're not wiping down flag sticks and they're high-fiving. It's going to take a minute for these guys to figure out what the new normal is. And I think we're getting there. And the more and more positive tests that we see, the more and more feedback I get from players and caddies that we need to take this seriously. We do need to wipe down flags. We do need to reduce how much we interact with each other. The example that I was going to use is I was actually staying in one of the bubble hotels last week in Hilton Head. And I'm not inside the bubble. The media is not, for whatever reason. And I walked upstairs to get dinner takeout from the hotel. There's a rooftop bar. And it's outdoors. So I was just going to go and get my meal and take it back to my room. And there was a player in the bar having a drink. And there was no one else around. And he called me over to talk like we normally would. And about 30 seconds in, I think we both realized that, no, we shouldn't be doing this. And we kind of nodded awkwardly and went our separate ways. But these are all the things that it's going to take some time for players to figure out. But I think they are trying.
No, for sure. And building off of that, you mentioned how, you were at, Fort Worth and, Hilton Head. And I'm just curious, as a reporter like yourself, who has, spent your whole career, covering golf where, you're interacting with people and you're, walking inside the ropes, covering the event. I mean, what's this difference been like for you with all these restrictions as a reporter, and has it impacted your ability to do your job at all?
Of course. Yes. I don't think there would be any other way. If you can't have a conversation with a player when he's walking to his car after a round of golf, if you can't talk to them on the range or the putting green, it's going to limit your access. It's going to limit your ability to do your job, because those are what the conversations have. They're obviously not talking to you in the middle of a tournament round. And so, yeah, there are going to be drawbacks. However, I will say that the tour has gone above and beyond. And I'll give you an example of, so what we're doing right now is essentially what happens on Tuesdays and Wednesdays with players. And they have provided lots and lots of players. I think the first week it was 8 interviews on Tuesday and 6 or 7 on Wednesday. And it's like this, but you do have access to them. You can ask them questions and you can interact. Otherwise, they've also created, they started this last week and they're going to continue to do it. There's 2 pool reporters who can go down to sort of this bullpen, and you're separated by, 20 feet in a barrier. And as long as you have a face mask on and you maintain that separation, they were very leery of that at the first event. I mean, it was very much a growing pain, and it was a concern on our part that we didn't have any access at all. They became more comfortable with it last week because they saw that we can adhere to the guidelines, that we will follow the rules, that the players are comfortable with it. The interesting thing is, anytime I talk to a player last week, for example, and I have the mask on and I'm staring 20 feet away, they don't understand why it's having to happen like that. Like they just assume that we're inside the bubble, and we're not. And so all of these things we're having to learn and change on the process. Change as we go along.
Shifting gears now to talk about your career, and in doing research for this interview, I noticed that you served in the United States Marine Corps from 1986 to 1990. And first of all, thank you for your service, and like you're my first Marine on the show. And my question is how did that experience prepare you to become a journalist, if at all?
Oh, no, it did, because I was a military police officer. So I was a cop. And it's a lot of the same things. Absolutely. It's a lot of the same things where you're writing a police report, you're writing a story. You kind of start who, what, where, when, why, right? And I think beyond that, I wasn't prepared to go to college at a high school. I wasn't a great student, didn't really pay attention all that well. So just 4 years in the Marines and having to experience that level of dedication and that level of commitment, and they weren't going to let you do it any other way. So it certainly taught me how to be a better student, which taught me how to be a better journalist. So yes, no way I'm sitting here today if it wasn't for the Marine Corps.
Yeah, it just goes to show you. I've had guests on the show and who are in sports media, and like there's so many different paths to get into sports media. Like there's people I've had on the show that go to Syracuse journalism and get in there. And then, you know, you have people like yourself that, you know, serve your country, but then, you know, learn the important skills that then can lead you to having a really successful journalism career. So it just goes to show that there's no real silver bullet. And I think, you know, different paths can lead you to getting involved in this really fulfilling industry.
No, absolutely. And when I started out in journalism, I was working at the Orlando Sentinel, and I actually spent 5 years working in the Capitol Bureau up in Tallahassee, covering state government. And I was the third reporter out of three. And so inevitably I got whatever they did want. So every day it was almost like reinventing the wheel. It was having to learn about a certain bill or a certain amendment or some sort of policy board meeting, whatever the case may be. I never felt like I was an expert at anything because every day I was kind of going off in a different direction. And I started helping our sports guy in Tallahassee out cover FSU football games and basketball games. And I immediately realized that this is much better. Like this, I can wrap my mind around. I know this. I don't have to learn this. So that's kind of how I ended up going in that direction.
So then how did you go from covering state government in Tallahassee to then be, you know, covering inside the ropes with the game of golf?
I transferred back down to Orlando, and I was probably the sixth reporter out of six on that staff. And so I covered, you name it. You come up with some goofball sport, and I covered it. I mean, women's fast pitch, softball, roller hockey, which, by the way, I covered 2 national championship teams, the Jackals, 2 seasons in a row. I mean, you name it, and I was covering it. And a golf writer at the Sentinel at the time, he's a very famous golf writer, named Jeff Babineau. He kind of took me under his wing and let me start going. I started at Disney the first year Tiger played Disney. So then I kind of came out to do, which is ironic, that my first job as a golf journalist was to do what I've been doing now since then, which is 1997, which was only to solely cover Tiger Woods, which is pretty much what I've spent the rest of the better part of 2 decades doing. And then he ended up going to a magazine called Golf Week. And so I took his job for about a year, and then he hired me to go to Golf Week. And that's kind of how that started.
And, you know, you say that you're covering Tiger Woods. I mean, what an opportunity in the game of golf to be covering such a dynamic figure. I'm just curious, you know, from when you started back at Golf Week up until now, how has your coverage of the game changed? I mean, obviously there was no social media back when you started, so that's been a big part. But I'm just curious, just in general, how golf reporting has changed.
Well, for me personally, dramatically, because keep in mind, I mean, can you think of a better job covering golf for a weekly magazine? So not only are you covering a game that you love, but you're only having to work 1 day a week. So it was a pretty good deal. Absolutely. So probably social media is probably the biggest one. The example of that I would give is that right before the commissioner's press conference yesterday, I received a copy of a memo that they had sent out. So I knew the changes, but there was a very small window, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe tops. And so I knew I wasn't going to be able to write a whole story and get it posted. But now with Twitter and social media, I was able to not necessarily break the story, but to get the information out there. And no, that was absolutely not the case. When you're at Golf Week, you would kind of collect all week long. And then Sunday night, you would sit down and write pretty much all night. And, you know, you ended up, you know, you would have 4 or 5, 6 pieces that you had to do a column and a couple feature stories, whatever the case may be. So no, it's not like that now. I think for everyone involved, even for the weekly magazines, it's much more, you're driven by the minute. There aren't any deadlines anymore, because just assume that whatever deadline you're on, you need to get it in 10 minutes ago.
Well, and I also, you know, imagine too that a lot of these, you know, magazines, you know, they have now digital outlets, right? Like, you know, you look at Golf Magazine, you know, golf.com, you know, Golf Week, golfweek.com. So it's, you know, that whole print, you know, deadline driven idea is now been shifted to the web, where you're not necessarily rushing to write a story, but it also gives you the opportunity to maybe take some more deeper dives in certain topics and players and trends that are currently in the game of golf.
Oh, I think so. And I mean, I ended up with a really good boss, Jay Coffin at Golf Channel, who he and I came up together. We actually went to UCF together and worked at the Sentinel and worked at Golf Week. And so he and I were always kind of under this, or have always been under the same mindset that there is an immediacy to what we do. I mean, you want to win. I mean, we're competitive. We always want to be the first. However, he's also really good at looking at things from 30,000 feet. Whereas I'll be the first to admit, when you're at a tour event, you can very easily get lost in the weeds and kind of lose sight of what the bigger narrative should be. And he's really good at reining me in and really allowing us, me and my coworker Ryan Lavner, a lot of latitude to go out to dig into those bigger stories. Like, I don't know how many outlets really have a chance to do that. Where in our golf week days, we would do it a lot, but like, it's almost a mandate from him that he wants 2, 3, 4 big takeout pieces a year. And if that means getting on a plane and flying around the world to try to track that story down, he's fine with it as long as you deliver it. And I think it's a very good balance, because I don't think you see that very much, at least not anymore in golf journalism.
And speaking of those big tournaments, obviously, during your career, you've had the opportunity to cover a lot of the game's biggest tournaments, major championships, Ryder Cups, etc. The thing about, a golf tournament is, you're there for the whole week. It's not like, you're going to a basketball game or a hockey game where it's that one moment and then, perhaps see you later. But golf tournament's a golf tournament for that 1 week. And I'm just curious for you as a writer, reporter, what your process is when you get to the tournament and are you writing every day? What sort of, your tips, if you will, in what you're doing, the whole week?
You're writing every day. You're writing. I mean, with golfchannel.com, you're writing quite a bit. And then there's a balance with TV as well, because I mean, more and more over the years since I've been at the Golf Channel, you've been drawn into that, which is great. And I enjoy it because it's an entirely different challenge. And I think it's really kept me engaged. But I mean, you always show up at a tournament. I always show up at a tournament with some ideas. Like, usually you'll spend Sunday before you travel just sort of looking at what happened last year or what the narrative is on tour at that particular moment. You always show up with an idea of where you want to go. Very rarely do you go there, I've discovered, simply because I've always found that you can go to a player and ask him, I'm going to throw the Premier Golf League out there, the subject, because you want to write about it that week. Inevitably, you're going to end up getting something else and going off in a different direction. So it's a little being up there, sometimes opinions off there, but the actual process of it is I do, and I think most of my coworkers are the same way. I mean, you have some ideas, you have a notebook, you got a page, you're going to jot down some ideas and who you need to talk to and how the conversation you want it to go, even before you arrive.
And I'm sure, the bigger the moment that occurs, like, let's say, Tiger's Masters win last year in 2019, as a writer, you want to make sure that you get those words right, because this is such a captivating moment. There's a lot of people commenting on this narrative. Do you feel that at all? Like, do you feel, sort of like, the golfer on a Sunday trying to close it out, that, you have that added, motivation to get and capture the moment the best?
That's probably a terrible example, because I can vividly remember still sitting at my laptop on that Sunday night trying to think to myself that this is too big to write. Like, I'm never going to do this justice. And I take some solace that the great Dan Jenkins, who's the best golf writer of all time, in my opinion,
of course,
that he wrote the same thing in 1986 when Jack won. So he always felt like it was too big to write. So if he was overwhelmed, then it makes me feel a little bit better that I was overwhelmed. When you're in those big moments, certainly at a major championship or a Ryder Cup, and you understand. I mean, last year in Japan was probably another good example of that, when Tiger ties the record and really kind of out of the blue. I mean, none of us were expecting much out of him because he hadn't played much. Flying 12 hours isn't great for Tiger anymore. We all know that. So really low expectations, and just the way he did it and trying to put it in context and trying to get people to understand exactly how big it is. Now, sometimes it's easy because the subject matter is easy. And in this particular case, and he doesn't do it very often, and he hasn't done it very often in his career, but for some reason, Tiger actually gave up a little bit in Japan about, he's always been reluctant to say, okay, this was a bigger victory than that. Like, he's not at that stage in his life. I understand that. So he's never really able to play the game of what does this mean to you, because he's not going to give you a good answer. For some reason, I think he understood the gravity of that one. Like, even though it was halfway around the world and not a lot of people were paying attention because of the time difference, to him, it meant a lot. And you could tell, and he kind of gave you something that he normally didn't give you. So you kind of dream for stories like that, for Sundays like that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with just staring at a blank screen trying to figure out who this guy actually is that won the tournament. So it's great if you have that drama. Like, first 2 weeks on tour certainly had plenty of drama.
Sure.
And that kind of this goes back to just one of the best pieces of journalist advice I ever got from an old colleague of mine, Jeff Rube. He said, we only have two jobs, and it's to report and to entertain. And just by putting words and numbers on paper, Tiger Woods shot 66, you're reporting. The hard part's entertaining, and everyone does it differently, but that's always the main goal.
And speaking of, reporting, entertaining, you mentioned how, not only do you write, but you're also on TV, which presents, also, a unique challenge and opportunity, because I know, you did mainly writing before TV, but I'm just curious about whether or not that, transition from writing to TV was challenging for you, and how long did it take for you to sort of get into that rhythm of being comfortable on the air?
I can answer the first part of that question. I'll let you know when I'm comfortable, because I haven't gotten to that point yet. So
you seem comfortable to me, Rex. You seem comfortable to me when I watch you on Golf Channel. So
actually, and I hate to say this because the pandemic's been awful for everyone, so I apologize for saying this. But the one thing is, I'm filming from exactly where I'm sitting right now, all my hits, and it's actually made me feel very comfortable. That I can sit in my chair, and my dog is right behind me, and I'm kind of surrounded by my own world. It did take. It's taken a long time. I can remember it was Torrey Pines, and it's probably a month onto the job, and they had me standing up to do my very first hit from location, and I almost passed out. Felt my knees getting weak, and there's just those terror moments that you get right before the camera comes on, that you're going to forget everything it is you hope to say. I have gotten better with that. I've kind of learned how to breathe a little bit, and okay, the information, and they keep giving credit to everyone else. But Tim Rosefort helped me so much on that front, because what we do as reporters is we fill up notebooks. And the better reporter you are, the better writer you're going to be. And I always adhere to that. And it's the same thing for a TV reporter or an insider, whatever it is you want to characterize it as. But then you only have 90 seconds. So as opposed to having 3 hours to write a big story, I've got 90 seconds to figure out how to get the most important pieces of information out there. And I would start by taking meticulous notes and exactly what I wanted to say. And Rosie was quick saying, yeah, that's not going to work. Just write down one word, and then write down another word for your second item, and then write down a third word for your third item. And that's it. Don't write anything more than that. Just do trigger words. That way you can just glance down and Tiger Woods left knee. Got it. All right, moving on. It helps simplify things, because everything happens so quickly when you're on air, and you sit and you feel like you wait forever, and then it happens in the blink of an eye, and then you're done. So I've kind of learned that writing now is where I go to crawl up in the ball and hide after I've done TV. So that's the enjoyable part.
No, yeah, and I think you mentioned how writing for print is a lot different than writing for broadcast. Again, it's that short amount of time, and you got to make sure that you get what you want to say delivered in as entertaining and an effective way as possible. It's easier said than done, but again, the more reps you do, I guess you feel, slightly more comfortable, but again, it's always a process that you're trying to evolve.
Yeah, I almost punched Jerry Foltz, who's a very good friend of mine, in the face once, because it was early in my days at Golf Channel, and he's on the course, and so it's a different animal. I get that. But we were having this conversation about, man, how do you make it look so easy? And he's looking at me like, why do you make it so complicated? Like, just talk. Like, yeah, it doesn't work that way for me. Like, I'm wired differently than you. And I think Brandel's really good at this.
Yeah.
Where he's got a head full of ideas, and he's able to slow everything down enough in the heat of the moment when it really matters the most, and just to say the most poignant things and the most insightful things that you kind of sit back afterwards and you're like, I could have sat here for 10 minutes and not come up with that line. And I think it's all kind of, again, how we're wired. If I'm sitting at my laptop and I'm writing sentences for a story, then they do come fast. But if you put me in front of a camera, and I think Ryan Lavner's the same way. He and I have this conversation a lot. So it is very much an acquired skill. Trust me. Work in progress is how I would put it.
Final question for you, Rex, and it sort of has to do with sort of, the current, for young writers, who often listen to this show and are looking for ways to get, and break into the industry. Obviously, it's a lot different from when you first entered, but despite the differences, there are more unique opportunities to create new content, particularly in golf and, in terms of digital media, podcasting, etc. I'm just curious for you, in your opinion about whether or not having more skills in the toolbox at your disposal as a journalist can make you, better off going down the road when you're looking for different jobs in golf media and just sports in general.
Oh, absolutely. And I never intended it to work out that way. So I don't want to sit here and pretend like, yes, this was the master plan all along, because I never had any interest in TV. But certainly 10 years after being a Golf Channel, it helps having just not having been on TV, but having gone through the reps, as you say, where I can sit down now and Ryan Lavner can do our podcast and it's relaxed and we try to be funny with it instead of making it TV. And I think all of these things sort of factor into it. And I have and I've actually been asked this question a lot lately about how do you break into a business now that's so different than when I did it. And I still think the basic tenets are the same, that number one, you just go out and write, you go out and cover things. When I was in college, I covered every game high school football game on a Friday night I possibly could, because I knew I didn't need that $5 that they were paying me. I needed the reps. I needed to go out and understand how this works. And I would also encourage anyone to do exactly what you're doing. I mean, the way social media works now and the way it's kind of, you don't even have to separate the two, media and social media, because I do believe it is one. And you can do a podcast, you can do a good blog, you can, whatever it is you're going to be an expert in, there are plenty of outlets for you to do that now. And I think in some ways that actually makes it easier now than when I came in.
Rex Hoggard, he's a senior writer for Golf Channel. Rex, thank you so much for joining me today on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. Keep up the great work and enjoy the rest of the PGA Tour season.
Thanks, man. Hey, I feel bad. I did not wear a jacket. I apologize.
No, don't worry about it, man. Like, I love the golf attire. I mean, I should have gone into my golf attire, but it's just, it's just how I wear these things these days. So it's all good.
Hey, that was fun. Thanks for having me on.